Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and I'm excited to have XYPN member Hui-chin Chen, owner of Pavlov Financial, on the show today. Hui-chin was on the show 2 years ago and was 20% owner of Pavlov Financial at that time, but since has taken over the business from Marcio, the founding partner, and is 100% owner of the business now. Hui-chin works with globally mobile clients, typically living overseas and planning to move to a new country. She's globally mobile herself, moving countries every 1 to 2 years for her husband's job with the U.S. government. She shared about the complexity that these clients face in their financial lives, adding multiple levels of complexity with moving around the world, having assets and income in multiple countries, and sometimes marrying someone from another country, which just continues to add even more complexity. She talked about how she forms teams of experts based on each client situation, since they're all unique, and how she manages that team so the client is getting the best advice possible. It was great to hear how she's running and growing the business, and also to learn more about an upcoming project to help educate advisors on working with global clients. XY Planning Network's annual benchmarking survey is out. Are you curious about the average number of clients XYPN members get in their first year, or how successful niches really are? To answer these burning questions and more, we've again enlisted a professional research firm to complete our annual benchmarking study. Get your copy hot off the press and discover vital statistics such as the median advisor revenue by years in practice and sources of firm growth, from referrals to blogging, social media, and more. Head over to xyplanningnetwork.com/study to purchase your copy today. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/226. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Hui-chin. Hey, Hui-chin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being back on.
Well, thank you for having me back on.
So for listeners who have not listened to every episode, I know there's maybe one or two of you out there. You can go back to episode 75, xyplanningnetwork.com/75, and you can hear more of the career story of Hui-chin and how she came to be with Pavlov Financial. So if you want to hear a career story, we won't talk about it here. You can go back there. But a lot has changed. It's been 3 years since you were on the show. It does not feel like it has been that long. And I think one of the big things is you are now the sole owner of Pavlov, whereas you were what percentage ownership were you probably when we recorded last time?
I think I was either 20 or 30%.
So talk to me about the transition of becoming the owner, how that happened and that sort of thing.
So my partner at the time, Marcio, some of you probably know him. It's just for his, own sort of family situation that he decided to exit the firm. So I took over since January 2018. And it has been as a lot of new learning experience. So even though before then I was already, handling my own clients, but and building up a lot of the operations side of the business is the first sort of starting 2018 is when I'm actually taking over the compliance side of things. So that's kind of interesting and challenging.
So that was January of 18. So it's been almost 2 years now. So you already had ownership interests. And so can you talk to me about sort of what were you doing as an owner already in the firm? I mean, did y'all meet, regularly and do strategic planning and do quarterly reviews or something like that? Or was it pretty more ad hoc, I guess?
You mean between the partners or with clients?
Yeah, between the partners.
Okay. So I think we were partners for about 3 years. So during that time, I was both in the US and out of US. So there was about 10 months that we were actually a block away where we lived. Yeah, so we actually were able to do it during that few months. We were able to do like weekly meetings, like face to face. So that was pretty good. But before then, that's when I was in New Zealand. We will try to do weekly or bi-weekly calls. And the same when I was in Taipei. So there was definitely sort of ongoing discussion of the operation side of things more than clients. So we mostly deal with our clients separately. So it's mostly operation.
Okay, so at that time, so before you took over fully, you had clients and Marcio had clients?
That's correct.
Yeah, and I guess I was just curious about how much of the running the business and owning the business you were involved in, because obviously it's different taking over if you have some experience doing that versus no experience doing that, I feel like.
Yeah, I think I was pretty much running the firm in terms of, because when I joined Marcio originally, a lot of the operational things aren't in place. So there was the idea of starting doing monthly retainer, but I was sort of instrumental in setting up all those procedures and figuring out what's the right way to deal with clients, how to set up the contracts, CRM, financial planning software, what's the products we're producing, service calendar, everything.
Okay, so you were pretty well involved in the operations and running of the business.
Yeah, the only thing I sort of intentionally not touching was the compliance, the dealing with regulator whenever we're making changes, because, I wasn't in the US constantly. So I had that fear of dealing with the regulator from the very beginning. But, so far, since I took over, even though I was overseas, I was able to deal with that.
So yeah, what do you feel like is different now that you're running everything? Is compliance sort of the primary difference, do you feel like, or are there other differences that you're seeing that maybe weren't what you expected, by taking over?
I think the main difference for me is finally getting an identity. So it's kind of interesting. So, Pavlov is my only firm that I've ever, well, not the only firm in the US I've ever worked under as a financial planner. And so, I came in as a a financial planner without equity and having equity as an owner. But it's sort of like I'm gradually getting into this firm, but this entity which Marcel started was already there. So I was never really sure, my identity in terms of, for people who started their firm and the firm is synonym to their name, right? Like they have all the control of how the sort of the not just the marketing, the brand side of things and the marketing side of things, the niche they're going after, and they're all very closely linked to, who they are and what kind of people they want to serve. And because I came in with another partner and was a minority partner, there was never like a true coherent way we're facing the world, if that makes sense. So taking over, completely, it gives me more freedom to do what I want to do, I guess.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I think that's a really important part that we don't talk a lot about is the difference when you didn't start the firm and you don't own and run the firm, and it's just different being an employee or even a partner. I think a lot of younger planners want partnership, and I frequently get questions on should I ask for equity early on, and I've always, to be frank, like I've always found that having a minority interest stake in a small business is not actually all that rewarding, like because in the end you have no control, and it's a little different. And so it sounds like you've seen some of that, and very cool that you feel like you've been able to find some identity and start to, I guess, the firm is evolving into more your vision, and really over the last 2 years it's become your vision versus Marcio's.
Yeah, and I'm still very grateful for, what I get to learn under him, starting as a minority partner. So it's different types of freedom, right? Like, because this is my second career, you're developing into it, from being a student of financial planning to becoming a financial planner and an owner of a firm. So before, when he's more the face of the firm, I have more of the freedom to actually learn and develop a process of, who I am as a planner, but perhaps not as much as the really who I am as identity and brand to the people that I want to serve. So I feel like, yeah, it's like entering another phase of, further development. of myself.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you feel like the firm has evolved since you've taken over? I mean, what do you feel like you've been able to do to bring it or sort of transition it towards your vision for what you want the firm to become?
Yeah, so what's in my has been my heart all this time since I started was serving people who have global careers and connections. So I've always sort of held myself out as people who are interest person, a financial planner who has great interest in it, has been doing a lot of work in this area. But before, when I was, under this umbrella of Pavlov with another person, it was not as pronounced of, who I am, what I'm doing. And since January 2018, I've become sort of just more putting myself out there of like I'm the financial planner to do this kind of work. And it has been great. I feel like being able to just make that message clear has made my life a little bit easier too. So now I have to constantly thinking about, oh, how am I different from other people?
So, where are you currently living? Because I think last time we recorded, you would have been in Thailand, maybe?
Last time recorded, I was in Taiwan.
Taiwan. Okay.
Yes, since then we have moved to Chengdu, China, for almost 2 years, and then we moved to Saint Lucia, where I am right now.
Can you remind listeners what keeps you on the move a little bit?
Yeah, my husband works for U.S. government overseas, so he has different postings that we go to.
So you are now settled into St. Lucia. Where is your firm actually registered? Because since you're moving all over the place, you still have to have your firm registered somewhere. So where are you actually registered?
Yeah, the primary business is in Virginia, just outside of DC. So I'm also registered in DC, and now I'm registered in California as well.
Have you ever had any issues with the regulators with the sense that just with the fact that you're not in the US, but the business is and you're, moving around every couple of years?
Yeah, that was always something that sort of scared me until I really, actually a few months ago, got the call from a regulator, just asking me to explain my situation. But after my explanation, they were okay with it. And my U4 has always, reflected my physical presence in every single country. And it's public information. So if you go pull my U4, you will see everywhere I've been to.
Right. So, but they were understanding because some regulators want to be able to come into your office, so they're comfortable with the fact that if you get audited, that you're not going to be there, or would you have to come back to the States for that?
It's interesting you asked that because I am in the past, actually the 3 years I was in Asia, that was like a constant sort of, I guess not before Marcio wasn't there, right? So for the 2018, I was still mostly in Asia, and I always have prepped myself like mentally when I get the call, I'm going to buy a ticket and fly like half the world back to do audit. And it didn't happen, but this year it's likely going to happen, but I'm much closer, so I'm prepared to do that.
Awesome. So, can you talk to me about your niche market and sort of the client base that you specialize in working with?
Yeah, so like I briefly mentioned, I work with people with global careers and connections. So that's pretty broad, but it's kind of like if you think about in the general labels that you might use, like expats, immigrants, all those things. But I think one common theme to the people I work with is that we have a more transient element in our lives. So if you ask my clients, where do they think they will going to be in 3 to 5 years, they most likely won't say they're going to be where they currently are. So there is always an element of where they are right now is not where they're going to be. So that opens up a lot of planning opportunities and, of course, a lot of uncertainties and, how you deal with uncertainties with financial planning.
Yes, let's talk about that because that's an area where niche market can mean different things to different people. I like the Michael this year at the conference quoted Steve Wershing, and I like this quote around that serving a niche is simply helping solve a particular problem, which I really like. But the planning complexity with people who are globally mobile is complicated. So can you talk to me a little bit about the work that you do with clients around that?
Yeah, sure. And I love that definition of solving a very particular problem. But it's also how do you define that problem, right? So I think for the people that I work with, one of the main problem is dealing with uncertainty. And a lot of people, when facing that uncertainty, their reaction is to not deal with it. Because if they don't deal with it in 2 years, it's going to change, then they might as well not deal with it. But then they might just end up losing the opportunity. They can really restructure their finances to help them make the next move. So I think one common theme that I get from working clients like that is that once they really face that uncertainty and have a way of dealing with it, especially for their finances, it is really being helpful.
So can you give me an example of maybe a real client, or you can just make it a case study if you prefer to not share a real client story, but just like the types of clients that are coming to you and the situations that you're helping them with. So, just, I don't know, could you just walk me through sort of a typical case, if there is a typical case?
I often get cases like, for example, people who are moving overseas for the first time. It could be for their employment or because they have already moved overseas, but they were okay because they felt like they're still getting paid in the U.S. and things like that. But then they met their spouse overseas, and their spouse may not be American, right? It could either be somebody locally or for another expat from another country. So now you have this complicated situation where, it's you're living this life. It's not supposed to be complicated, but it's live your life, and then you have this two different financial system smashed together. So for people, even getting married is a huge financial undertaking. Not to talk about the if you're marrying somebody from another country and try to work out a financial system that work for you. So I often come in that situation when people feel like they cannot get a grasp around where to even start.
Yeah, where do you start? Like, if I was moving overseas, I mean, I can barely travel overseas comfortably. So, well, I should say it is comfortable. It is definitely not comfortable to travel overseas. And so, if I'm, my job decides to relocate me, XYPN's going global. Let's go to, I don't know, where are we going first? Sweden, because I've always wanted to go to Sweden. So, XYPN Sweden, like, what are you working? Like, how are you helping me, with that transition? What are the things that I'm going to have to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I guess there are two things, right? One is the actual transition, so the moving part, and the other is what after you actually move, like live there, what are the complications? So for U.S. citizens, most people listen to the show probably know that U.S. is probably only one or two country in the world where citizenship ties you into the U.S. tax system forever. So even if you move overseas, there's always this sort of financial ties or financial base that you will keep in the US. Even if you have no assets and no income from US, you will still have tax liability from income and assets overseas. So that's one big thing when we work with people with cross-country or multi-country situation, is to first understand the obligations in terms of not just income tax, but also report tax compliance reporting, and also in terms of social security system. So those are sort of like the government related information. And then you start dealing with investment view, whether it makes sense for you to invest overseas at all because of the tax complication and compliance issue. So all of those, when you think about doing a single country planning, that's why financial planner come in, because you can do a global view of how your investment and tax and social security all work together. Just think about it as, now you have two countries and there's an interaction between the two countries. So there, you need to have an even broader point of view on how you look at it.
How in the world do you keep up with all the changes? Because I mean, most planners I know can barely keep up with just the changes that are happening in the U.S. So because you're working with clients that are moving to different countries, right? It's not just people who are moving to one country.
Yes.
So how do you, I guess, get up to speed on, a new country if you haven't worked with clients that are moving to that country, as well as just stay up to speed, based on where clients are at?
Yeah, so there are two ways I deal with it. One is there are probably certain countries I will, I guess, depending on situation, right? Like if a new prospect comes to me and I already, based on my understanding from the first phone call or email, that their situation is specific to US and another country, and they're unlikely to have ties with another country anytime soon. I might refer them to people who have those, country tie specific expertise because, that's what they focus on. I end up taking a lot of clients who the situation is not so, neatly defined, right? It's not just US and other country. It's likely US and two other countries, or right now there's two countries, but they're moving soon to the third country. So it's definitely not a speedy process. And when you're talking about keeping up with a change, it's not even a change. It's trying to help the clients dissect dissect the situation and bringing in the experts in those specific areas that we need help on. And my role is really more on, if you think about at the CEO level, where I know I'm not an expert in every single thing, but I am the expert of managing a team that has different expertise dealing with global planning issues.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot to manage. Like I said, it's hard enough to keep my own personal finances in check in the U.S., much less whenever you're in two or three different countries, or in a second country thinking about moving to a third country. So, what are some of the other considerations and things that you're helping clients with in that situation? Never having been in that situation, I don't even know what you have to think about other than maybe like what bank account to use. Like I said, if you should be investing, but like you move to certain countries and suddenly you're eligible for a pension there if you're there long enough. So I guess what are some of the other things that situations clients are dealing with that you're helping them with?
I think you mentioned a few of them. And if you just think about in the US, all those questions that clients will ask you, oh, how much should I save? Where should I invest? What should I invest in? All of that. It just expand that to 2 to 3 countries, right? So now you have options. How much should I save in this currency? How much should I save in that currency? Should I save in 2 countries or just one? Should I keep? So one process that I help clients go through, which I actually presented in the XY Planning live just last month, is the process to help clients go through when does that make sense to keep more than one financial base. And when I say financial base, is basically where clients have income and assets. So there's definitely times when it just makes more sense, even though clients are moving around, they can just keep one financial base in the US and be done with it. But sometimes it's not something they cannot avoid, right? For example, the situation I mentioned, if you marry somebody from another country, so you're most likely going to have two financial bases for the rest of your marriage. So how do you deal with that? And sort of then we start with the financial base and dissect all the different parts, like the savings, the investments, the taxes, social security, all of that.
Do you find that the clients that you're working with tend to be entrepreneurs, or they tend to work for the government and similar situation to that you're in and sort of getting relocated around the world? Or are there some similarities? Are they folks that just want to be globally mobile and digital nomads and just sort of, float around the world? Or are there some similarities between the folks who are interested in that lifestyle?
Actually, I have clients in every single category you just mentioned. So yeah, so there are definitely a lot more of us than people realize. It's kind of funny. I mentioned that during a conference when I run into people on, the clients I work with, I got a few comments about, oh, it must be difficult to find clients, or like, how do you find that type of clients? But after they ask that questions, they immediately think about, oh, I have this friend who has been traveling around the world, or I have, my brother's wife, is from another country, that kind of thing. So I feel like almost I haven't never run into anyone who, I guess, felt that it's weird that people will have, more than one country, like the finance situation, more than one country that people need to deal with. I think there are more people like that out there than you normally think about. But I do work with a lot of people who are on government orders. But that's a special set of challenges as well, because usually that means one spouse is on government orders and the other is not. So what about the career of the other spouse, and what are the financial challenges that are coming out of it? So, for example, I'm sort of in tune with like two different groups that have this kind of issues. First, just perhaps U.S. born spouse who are traveling with their U.S. spouse who are either on government orders or working for international companies, multinational companies. And they need to figure out, well, should I find a job locally first? Can I find a job locally? Does my visa allow me to work? And if they are allowed to work, then now you have a dual currency household. You're earning income perhaps from both US dollars and your local currency. How do you deal with that? And does that make sense now for you to save and invest in another country? If not, how do you move the money back to US? And then there's, in this group of people also, then you have people like me who decided, well, it's not going to work if I need to find local jobs everywhere I go. So I'm going to start my own business. So starting your own business create another set of interesting questions. So do you register locally? Do you register in the US? If you register in the US, how do you deal with the local compliance? Do you need to register? Do you need to pay taxes? If not, what's the best way to structure your business? Yeah, so that's just the US born spouse. And then you have, I guess, in the government world, we often call it foreign born spouse, but it's just people who have, different nationality, and they married a US person who works for US government. And then the other set of question is, sometimes you will move back to the US for US assignments. And you're throwing these foreign-born spouses into a completely new environment in terms of, the new financial structure. They have no knowledge they don't have credit score.
Yeah,
They
just
don't
culturally in general is hard enough.
Yeah.
Plus, trying to get a credit card. Like, it's hard enough to get a credit card as an adult that I
Yeah.
was born here.
Yeah, no credit history, no work history. Sometimes, English is a second language, and then you need to find your own keep, right? Like try to look for a job. Even if you're a professional, have a professional career from the country you're from, you may not be able to continue that coming to the US. Yeah, so I don't know if it's like taking this conversation too far down, like sideways, but it is passion project of mine as well, for the spouses in the same situation that I am, helping them dealing with, yeah.
I'm trying to get my head wrapped around the complexity. So you mentioned earlier that part of your role in what you're great at is sort of forming the team or managing the team. Can you talk to me about sort of the teams that you form, the teams of experts in order to help clients navigate these situations?
Yeah, sure. It kind of, right now in my mind, I gave it a name as kind of like a pop-up family office. So how I think about it is, like the traditional family office is for a family that already has a lot of money to manage, and they have their own family office to help them deal with all the complexity, deal with multi-country. And for people, just a normal person, first of all, they don't have that kind of assets or income to justify having, have full-time staff to help them deal with the cross-border complexity. So how I envision it is for every specific client situation, I would create a pop-up family office to help them deal with the thing to form a team that help that specific situation. So for example, let's say I have a client, like you said, like moving to Sweden. Currently, let's say they're living in Japan and they're moving to Sweden. So originally they may have me as, the head of their family office, the primary contact, and I will try to help them find whatever Japanese situation that requires local specialty. I will be the point person to coordinate with that. So you could either have, tax, if that's what they need with the tax situation, or estate planning situation. So those are generally the two main focus, because most of the time the US has the best capital markets. So most people intend to keep most of their investments in the US. So unless there are retirement accounts type of things, or real estate or family wealth, most of the time I will be able to deal with, the US side of things without having to deal with too much the investment related to in another country. And of course, that's what a lot of people have questions on, is whether I can manage investments in another country. And my recommendation is generally don't even think about it, right? Because every country has its own regulation against that. So depending on whether they have the need for a local investment person. And let's say if this family then is moving to Sweden, then we look at, well, if there's a need for them to keep any of those professionals in Japan, or if all those situations will get resolved once they move. And then we will now switch to, okay, if they're actually getting a local job in Sweden, then most likely we need to have like local tax person that can work with, either have both US and Sweden tax expertise, or somebody who's willing to collaborate with a US team to deal with tax and estate planning and things like that.
It feels like with the specialization that you're in, that, I mean, you have taken a time intensive route, right? Like, these are not like quick, some quick start planning sessions and move on. These are pretty time intensive relationships. So can you talk to me about just I guess the time commitment that you are making to a new client? I mean, it sounds like you never have an opportunity to really become an expert on any one particular situation just because of the variety that you're working with. So it feels like every relationship is going to be time intensive.
Yes and no. I think a lot of the time intensiveness comes from dealing with a new situation, in terms of not necessarily country specific, but also, for example, moving from one country to another. So there is a level of familiarity of all the steps that you need to go through to make sure that we cover all the bases. So that is not time intensive part for me anymore, because I have my own processes to make sure all those boxes are checked. So it could be time intensive to find the right person to work with. But once you find the right person to work with, then the expertise is already there. So you're not trying to replicate the work that the expert is doing. So I almost feel like forming the team itself is the time intensive part, not necessarily the getting the expert knowledge in the situation. Yeah.
That makes sense. Talk to me about your fee structure, and how you're being compensated for this. Because again, this is pretty specialized, pretty intensive work that I'm not aware of anybody else doing this type of work. So can you just sort of outline for that client that's, maybe US citizens living in Japan, moving to Sweden, how are you structuring your fee structure for them?
Yeah, that's one thing I constantly sort of doubting myself because I really don't charge very much. So we've always, since Pavlov started, we have always used a monthly fee structure, and I've only started charging upfront this year. So even including an upfront fee for a complex situation like that, I think will only be probably at the $6,000 range for the year, for the first year. And then the idea is, as long as so you spend a lot of time in the first year to get the team together and get the situation in place. And then the second year on, because there's no upfront fee, it's just a monthly fee. So I'm pretty sure I'm undercharging my expertise, but I also feel like it's something that I'm constantly trying to figure out what's the right price point to get people to work with me, because there are a completely other segment. So even though when I just describe what I do, you think that it's really difficult, but traditionally there is a group of people that are doing that kind of work already, that are traditionally who came from the international tax background expertise and then grow their business to include wealth management. But most of those firms have grown to the size where they can set a minimum and, and plus investment management fee. So my clients are not the client that can get that kind of service from that kind of firm. So I also need to I guess my mission is make global planning accessible. So that reflects in the fee structure, but that's also something that I constantly think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I get it because, you are not charging, $50 a month. So you are charging, that $6,000 in that first year. That seems like a decent level of revenue to be targeting per client, because I see the challenge with this type of situation when you're so passionate about working with a group like this, that you could charge $20,000 a year and you will find clients who can afford that. But, many globally mobile individuals and someone who's working for the federal government and has a spouse who maybe started a small business, like they may not have a lot of money. It's not like the government is paying that top dollar for folks to move around the world. And so wanting it to be accessible to the people who are actually in that situation, it's always a tough balance.
Yeah, it is. And not to talk about, I guess I'm an older millennial, and like right now people like 15 years younger are also millennials, but I'm meeting a lot more people who are just starting their career, in their early mid 20s, and that's what they're interested in, is having a global career. And there are more people like that know the benefit of starting early to find the right person to work with, and they will start looking for a financial advisor, and then they realize they cannot afford them. And so they try to figure things out on their own. Like the people who actually pay more attention will try to, make things right. And the people who don't would just like, well, I just keep on doing what I'm doing and hope nothing happens, nothing bad happens. Yeah. So I do want to, one way I want to make financial planning accessible to this group of people is to make sure, first the information is out there and it's packaged correctly, so that, at different points of their lives, if they're not ready to hire somebody, there is information they can find.
So where are you finding clients, or how are clients finding you? Is it a pretty big referral network from other advisors or from existing clients? Sort of how are they making their way to you?
Right now, I'm getting a lot more advisor referral, but I guess now I'm more known as the person who will deal with complex situations.
You are.
So yeah, so when then and when an advisor get a prospect, or like if their current clients like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this, it's like, oh, go talk to Hui-chin. So I'm getting a lot more referrals like that, and also from existing clients, because our circle it's not small, but it's also tight knit. Like people who are traveling globally, once you're overseas, you tend to group together, not necessarily from your own country, but people who share this expat label. So I'm getting definitely referrals like that. And also I'm getting clients from XYPN portal as well. I think there are a few other advisors there as well, say we're happy to work with expats or people with international planning needs.
Yeah, and it is the beauty of a niche, and like I said, that you are becoming known as the member with that niche, because you speak at our conference on the topic, and so therefore everyone who listens to you speak and sees the complexity of what you're focusing on is like, yep, not going to deal with that. And actually, we just had planners from Mana there in California talking, and they said they send you all their global stuff because they're like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that anymore. Because that was sort of the direction they started, and they were like, nope, never mind. Hui-chin can deal with it. So I can imagine that will continue. So again, but it is the value of having a niche is because other planners hear that niche and they start to send you clients because of that. So
yeah, and I think one thing the reason I spoke at a conference about this topic is not to tell everyone to send me, if you run into somebody with just international throw in their introduction, you're just like, oh, go talk to Hui-chin, I don't want this client. And I know for a fact that's not the case, because if you talk to advisors, they're going to tell you, oh yeah, I have these clients who live, overseas, or like they work with them. But, if they do, I'm sure I don't know how currently the advisors deal with that situation, especially, if you think about a long-term client that you work with and for 10 years, and in their financial plan is, when I retire early at age 50, I'm going to move to Ecuador. So it's coming. But you're not going to just send your clients suddenly you can find a Ecuador financial planner who can take over everything, for all those client relationships you built over 10 years. So the idea is hopefully this type of structure where you can still work with the clients, but finding the right person to work with you in specific situation. I'm hoping that this is the type of, I guess, framework that more advisors can take, instead of either just throwing clients away or just keep doing what they're doing with the clients without considering their cross-border situation, to actually properly implement a framework that will help clients like that.
no, that makes perfect sense. So, what are some of the big projects that you're working on now? Well, maybe I should start by asking: are you staying in St. Lucia for a while, or is this a short term stay?
Well, like I mentioned in the very beginning, like if you ask me whether I'm going to be here for in 3 to 5 years, the answer is probably no. So, but in the short term, I mean 1 to 2 years, yes, because in the past, I guess I'm since 2015, I've moved country every year. So we're excited about being able to stay here more than 1 year.
Right, but you don't know. But you don't know what's next. But you know somewhere is next.
Yes, it's unlikely I'll become, a permanent resident in St. Lucia. But yeah, it's likely going to be somewhere else.
Okay. So, yeah, so what are some of the big projects that you're working on? Because I know you certainly have a passion for, providing financial planning to globally mobile clients. And so are you working on anything specific over the next, let's say 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 months that listeners might be interested in hearing more about?
Yeah, so one thing really on my mind is developing resources and curriculum for global financial planning as a discipline. I basically, when people approach me, there's two types of people, right? Like the first type is like, you're the expert, go handle this case for me, I don't want to know. And the second type is, I'm really interested in, doing some kind of international planning, or learning more about global planning, and getting into, this niche, or just, for professional development. But where do I learn about it? Because there is no packaged information. It's not like there is a designation or a degree or even a class that teaches how you do cross-border global planning. So all of the existing larger firms, they develop their own, expertise over time, and they sort of just, become known as the people who do it. But it's not a knowledge that's packaged and passed down properly, in my opinion. And I feel like in order to sort of, break the myth of this is something that you just shouldn't touch, in order to get more people to serve my niche, the people that I feel like are underserved, I need to get more people interested and become knowledgeable in this area. So one thing I'm definitely trying to do is some kind of curriculum, class, course, symposium, whatever format it is in the next year or so to help people, really be able to, get a foot in the door.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we've seen, Joe Messenger with his college planning program and Heather Jarvis with the student loan training. Like a lot of times that's where these programs come from is, experts saying, hey, I need more people doing this. I'm only one person. I can't do it all myself. So how do we get more advisors interested in this type of work? I mean, do you feel like it's important that the advisor who is working with these clients be, if not living overseas, someone who travels quite a bit, so they really have an appreciation? And I don't mean like vacationing, but maybe slow traveling around the world or has experience traveling globally. Like I feel like this would be a tough conversation for someone who just like really likes their home and doesn't really ever want to travel outside the country, right?
Yeah, I think definitely it helps to have some kind of personal connection to the problems that we're facing, right? Like if you personally don't have appreciation of that, maybe at least somebody in your family or your friends, like, you have tried to help them navigate that situation. It doesn't have to be you personally, but at least like having like first-hand or second-hand appreciation of those problems will be helpful. Of course, not everyone. I've seen, I guess, just personally, because I'm a first-generation immigrant to the U.S. I'm married cross-culture, but then also living more like a U.S. expat lifestyle. I own a U.S. business, but live overseas. So I have more appreciation of the range of the problems that people can face, but not everybody needs to have the full range. Like if you know a specific, for example, their advisor is just focusing on immigrants, right? Like, so their cross-border complexity comes from their home country. They have family still in other country, and so income or assets or wealth in another country. So how do you deal with that in the U.S. context? So, there's definitely more niche within this niche that you can get into and probably make more business sense. And I think the real reason that I never really picked a niche within this niche to focus on is because my personal background, it's so diverse that I sometimes feel schizophrenic too if I just say, well, I'm just going to deal with immigrant, but then and what about, this other part of me? So I think that's the real reason why I didn't pick a niche within this niche.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you're going to be working on some curriculum, which it'll be great to see how that ultimately shakes out, because I think that's something that a lot of advisors are going to be very interested in. What are you hoping the business becomes? Is the plan to start hiring folks and start really growing the business, because you're in enough of a niche that you can continue to grow and get more clients and all of that. So what do you see for the business itself?
Yeah, I think that's one thing I struggle with. So obviously for every financial planner, there are different identities in terms of, what kind of financial planning do you do, right? Like not just the technical part of it, but also the type of client relationship you like to have. And in the past, I've always been just I would like to have very deep relationship, and plus the expertise area that I hold is also very deep. So it end up being this very time consuming client relationship that I have. So it prevents me from really growing business too fast or too big, or even like being able to hire another person to come in and take over part of the relationship. So that's something, that I'm still struggling with and still trying to find a way forward. But in terms of how I see business going, what I do know is that the business and the discipline of global financial planning is a feedback loop for me. So I'm still constantly learning from working with clients on what's important, and of course, different type of clients have different types of needs, and how do I create the right service model for this complex group of clients. I don't know if that makes sense. I guess it's just maybe, like in the XY planning study or the network study that, usually the benchmarking study that, like when you have a niche, it takes like 3 years to build. I almost feel like in my case, like an even more complex niche, it might even take longer to get to the point where, there is a solid growth plan.
Okay. No, it makes sense. So as we're sort of coming to a close, I'll ask you the final question. If you look back over the last couple of years, maybe this was since taking over the business or maybe before then, but if there's one piece of advice that you wish you could go back and give your younger self, what do you think that one piece of advice would be?
I was thinking about what I answered last time and I couldn't remember.
We'll go back and see if it's the same answer. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to say it and people can go back and see if it's the same answer. One thing I thought about was the progress is not linear. So whenever I feel sort of not sure whether this is going so well, it's something I try to remind myself. And then sort of looking back, when I was where I was before, I would have never seen the progress made so far. But it doesn't mean that, it's a linear progress, just like the stock market is not a linear, growth. Like we tell clients all the time, you need to be able to deal with a drawdown, even 20 or 30%. And that's what we're going to see, in life in general and the progression of how we see ourselves. So yeah, I think that's what I would continue to remind my younger self that, you will see different things in the future, no matter what that path is.
I love it. Well, Hui-chin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show again and share an update. A lot has changed, but all exciting things. And I look forward to seeing the next phase of the business. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
XY Planning Network's annual benchmarking survey is out. Are you curious about the average number of clients XYPN members get in their first year, or how successful niches really are? To answer these burning questions and more, we've again enlisted a professional research firm to complete our annual benchmarking study. Get your copy hot off the press and discover vital statistics such as the median advisor revenue by years in practice and sources of firm growth, from referrals to blogging, social media, and more. Head over to xyplanningnetwork.com/study to purchase your copy today. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.